Good morning, folks. My name is Dennis O'Shea. I'm the founder and CEO of Mobile Mentor. We're going to do a LinkedIn Live webinar this morning, sharing with you some insights from a recent research study we did that helps us understand what's going on in enterprises in terms of AI readiness and deployment. I've got a fantastic panel with me this morning: Kristen Norton, Jean Buckley, and Jonathan Maurer. Can each of you guys maybe do a quick bio, a quick overview of yourselves, and just let the audience know who you are and the work you do in the healthcare space. Kristen, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to be here. So, Kristen Norton, I am currently with Mobile Mentor here with Dennis as a senior business analyst working within the co-pilot realm and coaching organizations on how to find the most effective use of AI. But a little bit about my background is I'm a nurse by background, master's prepared nurse. I've worked in healthcare for 17 plus years. And most recently, before coming over to Mobile Mentor, I was working for a large healthcare organization, leading a department under informatics and balancing and interpreting technology deployments between IT and our nurses and operational leaders. And so that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen.
Yeah.
Jonathan, you are out there on the front lines dealing with some of the issues that Kristen touched on. Do you want to share a little bit about yourself and your background and role?
Jonathan Maurer, Chief Information Security Officer at Rochester Regional Health. I've been a CISO for coming on 20 years now in higher education and healthcare, and as Dennis mentioned, on the front lines of AI security and some of the challenges we're facing there.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Jean at Microsoft.
Sure, Dennis. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Jean Buckley. I lead a team of architects that work with our largest health clients here in the US to build out AI solutions and AI infrastructure.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here with us today. I'm going to share my screen, and this is a bit different. Okay, here we go. Can you see my screen? You can. I believe that's showing up. Okay, we're going to share a little bit about the research study we did and what that tells us about organizational readiness, in particular, healthcare organizational readiness for AI. And quickly, that's the panel you're seeing today. But the research study was called the endpoint ecosystem. That's quite geeky language. And what it means is we're looking at the collective of all the devices and their operating systems, the applications, the sign-in experience, security policies, and then all the supporting processes that empower employees. So everything from getting them onboarded, set up, give them all the right permissions, applications, tools, right through the whole experience. And we try to understand that and understand the balance between people and technology in that relationship. And we do this study every 2 years. The most recent one had 1,000 people in the US, 500 in the UK, 500 in Australia, and 500 in New Zealand. Those are the markets of interest to our business at Mobile Mentor. And we learn a lot every time we do this. The first one was early in the pandemic. People had just been told to go home and figure out how to work at home. The second one we did, we were kind of coming out of the pandemic and coming back to the office, and hybrid work was the norm. Now AI is the big story. How organizations are rolling out AI, what's happening. And so I want to share a few things here, and then we'll dive into the discussion. So first thing we see from the data is employees are still bypassing company security and their systems and processes whenever they encounter friction. Password hygiene is still a problem. Weak password habits still prevail. AI deployment is happening faster than training and data security and governance. Frontline workers, like the people Kristen talked about, the clinicians on the front line, are being left way behind. Execs and knowledge workers are getting the AI tooling and training. And then when we do our research, we slice it all by generation. And what we've learned over the 3 cycles of the research we've done in the last 6 years is that the more we study and understand the younger generations, the better we can predict the future. And so today we're going to talk quite a bit about Gen Z, because they are becoming the dominant cohort in the workforce. The more we understand them now, their behaviors, patterns, and preferences, the better we can predict the workforce in the 2030s, when they will be the dominant cohort. They will be the largest group in the workforce. So diving into a couple of these things, what we found from the data is really interesting. Young workers are most likely to bypass security controls. So in this chart, Gen Z is the light blue, and the baby boomer generation is the dark blue. And you see here, the older workers say, I would never bypass company security, and Jonathan would love to hear that. But the younger workers are saying, yeah, all the time. And older workers are not saying that. So hold that thought. And then young workers are also extracting the most value from AI. So again, the darkest color is the oldest generation, lightest color is the youngest generation. The generations, if you look at this one at the bottom, not using AI, so it's the older generations and those who consider AI to be essential to the way they work, the younger generations, Gen Z and the young millennials. And then one of the contradictions to that is young workers actually need more assistance with their onboarding. This surprised us. So again, Gen Z here, the light color, only 14% of them can manage with just one onboarding ticket when they join an organization. A much larger percentage of the baby boomers and Gen X can manage with one ticket. And the Gen Z and millennials need 3 or plus tickets to get onboarded. So that tells us a lot about Gen Z. They need help and support, but they're going to adopt AI quickly. And they're also going to work around our systems as they encounter friction. When we look at the balance between security and privacy, there's basically been no change in the last 3 research cycles. 70% of people say their personal privacy matters to them. That's their priority over the organization's security. Password hygiene has been really, really poor for a long time. And as we all know, credential theft and credential compromise is the #1 reason for all the cybercrime that happens. But there's something promising going on here in the data. We're seeing an increase in this answer. The question was, how do you keep track of and manage all your credentials? And the people who say, I don't have many, so I can remember them, that is increasing. So the darkest color is 2026, the lightest color is 2022. So we think that means people are using more biometrics, more single sign-on, and those methods are being rolled out across enterprises, finally. And we're seeing a drop in people using web browser password managers, which are really not good because they're not encrypted. A drop in people using online password tools, a drop in people using digital documents like a spreadsheet or a Word document, and a drop in people using their personal phones for their work passwords. So this is very positive, and kudos to those who've been working towards going passwordless. Then healthcare. Wow, this is so interesting. So when we look at, we ask organizations or we ask people, how has their company provided either generic or role-specific AI training? And the shock here is that 47% of healthcare organizations and 52% of government organizations got no AI training. So the dark color is healthcare and all these charts, and then government, and the lightest is education, and in between is finance. You're going to see finance showing up as a massive outlier to those other 3 industries shortly when I share a couple of more slides. So let's hold this thought. Almost half of healthcare workers get no AI training at all. So unsurprisingly, healthcare workers are not seeing a lot of value in AI. When we ask if your organization has developed and deployed any AI agents, again, healthcare and government are saying basically no. Finance, big outlier here, saying yes, and I actively use them. And then how much value do you get from AI tools at work? Not using AI at all, healthcare and government. And the organization, the industry that considers AI tools to be essential, finance. And they're the standout on a lot of these charts. And then when we go deeper and find out how can we correlate role-specific training with value derived from AI, the simplest way to look at this is the dark blue are those people who say that AI is now essential to my work and what I do. And 24% of people who receive role-specific training consider AI to be essential. So a very strong correlation between role-specific training and people extracting so much value they consider to now be essential. So if we draw some of these things together, and this is where I want to hear your thoughts as people working in the healthcare space, we're seeing 36% of healthcare workers say they're not using AI at all. Only 7% consider AI to be essential. 45% say no agents in the organization. So that's 45%. 47% say no training, and only 16% get role-specific training. So I guess my question to you guys is, what's going on? Given that healthcare is the largest industry, almost 20% of our economy, why is healthcare not leaning into AI in a bigger way and taking advantage of all this capability? So maybe, Kristen, why don't we get your perspective first as somebody who has most recently worked on the front line of clinical delivery?
Yeah, I think, it is really complex and complicated to think about this. And I think that there's a few pieces tied into this. So when you look at healthcare and you look at frontline workers, very often clinicians aren't always behind a computer, right? They're out there on the units, they're providing care directly to the patient. And so um, their workflows are different than somebody that may traditionally be behind a computer, working in finance, generating reports, automating data delivery, right? So the clinical workflow, in my opinion, is highly variable and quite complex, right? We're dealing with human beings, both as patients and as the caregivers. And so our workflows are not consistent.
Mhm.
Our data is a bit fragmented across systems right now. Um, and we are we operate within policies and guidelines and regulations. And so when we want to start looking at applying AI into our workflows, it's not just an AI tool, right? It's a transformation now in how we do
It is.
work.
Yeah.
It's truly a transformation. And so, how do we adjust some of our policies and our order sets and our workflows? What do we do when the workflows aren't consistent and standardized? How do we pull our data together so it's not so fragmented? And it just requires some really thoughtful conversations. And so I don't think that they're not seeing value in it. It just takes thoughtful conversations and planning and digging into the workflows of the people who are going to use it. And my other piece to it is ensuring that they're ready. Just because you put out the AI tool doesn't mean they know how to use it. And it's not like you missed a cell in a spreadsheet. It's leading to, impacts in patient care. And so I think with that, we're just having really thoughtful conversations around it, and that there will be value there. It's just taking time.
And I think one of the really interesting things about healthcare is everybody who works in healthcare is highly trained and trained to make decisions based on evidence or results. And so there's a natural caution. That's great for us as patients.
Yep.
We don't want clinicians trying funky new things that are unproven on us. But when it comes to rolling out technology, it makes it challenging.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of critical thinking and clinical judgment
Yes.
that you have to extract from the information that you can find readily on with AI. And so
Yeah.
there's value there.
Totally. Jonathan, when you apply a CISO's lens to this and think about the security, is security getting in the way of the AI deployment machine in healthcare? Or is security partnering with AI deployment? What's that relationship between security and let's say innovation when it comes to AI?
Well, it needs to be a partnership. And I think it's really important, building on Kristen's comments, to acknowledge that privacy and security is one of those areas where healthcare needs to proceed with very deliberate, perhaps even caution with AI. And many healthcare organizations are taking a phased approach. But you have to address the security and privacy concerns up front. But also, I would add to that cost and quality and safety are paramount as well. And these AI tools are not inexpensive. And I think that many healthcare organizations are kind of putting their foot in the water to test the AI across a certain segment of the population and let it prove in its value first before expanding beyond to the broader population. So it doesn't surprise me that there are individuals in healthcare that maybe say, hey, I'm not using AI. They may not necessarily have access to it yet because those tools have not been extended to them yet. But And I think that the organizations have to work through the privacy, the security, the quality and safety concerns first, and also make sure that they're making the appropriate investments from a cost perspective, and that the value is going to be realized. And I think that particularly given some of the financial headwinds that all healthcare systems are facing, it's really important that those that AI deliver that value back to the healthcare system.
Yeah, it's got to be proven. Yeah, solid business case. And Gene, from your perspective, I guess Microsoft probably has more telemetry on AI adoption globally than anyone else. What are you seeing? Is healthcare generally a laggard in AI adoption compared to other industries that you guys have a perspective on?
Yeah, Dennis, I would say it's absolutely we're seeing laggard, and this would be a U.S. statement. But what's interesting is when you kind of click down one layer deeper, you start to see kind of a pattern emerge where the client first has to kind of think about how to adopt AI responsibly, right? And that's observability. That's basically how do you keep the regulator in the loop as you start to implement things, right? So there's kind of this, and we saw this really in a lot of ways last year, where you've got to get that kind of format in place. What organizations within your company are going to be part at the table as those decisions are being made? Those all have to be sorted out first. So once you sort that out, I think that the slides you showed a moment ago start to talk about, everybody starts to then get to the how. How do we do this? What exactly is going to start to happen? How are we going to train people? And so we're seeing that. Like there was an interesting post this morning from Primera Blue, Dr. Adrian Mayers. And, he talked a bunch about how they're shifting from the infrastructure side, which I think is the logical place to start, to kind of this, how do you create at scale? How is it self-service, right? How are you basically helping employees co-create? And that, they very quickly went from very few pilots to 900 production agents. So a lot of opportunity. So we're seeing a mix of things, but I think the pattern that you see is consistent. It has to be done that way because we have an obligation to patients, to the organization, to the community to do it in the correct way.
Yeah. And when you reflect back on that data I showed about younger generations adopting AI much faster than older generations, is that reality in your worlds and your organizations?
Yeah, I'll jump in. What we saw in a number of large payer and providers is they actually went back after the relatively standard training, one-to-many kind of events that we've all been part of. And they found a couple of things that the younger employees had grabbed it faster and were moving more rapidly. They were less afraid of errors. They were diving in and making mistakes. And there was a little resistance in the older crowd. Mm-hmm. And so they actually had to go back, and we did this with them. Two things. We basically doubled down on some additional training, which is relatively. The other feedback we got from the different cohorts was, it's not one size fit all. So a half-hour session at lunchtime doesn't work, as Kristen talked about. You've got people on different shifts. The feedback we got was we need snackables, and we got down to kind of 2-minute sound bites on specific skill sets that are indexed. So if you're interested in a particular skill, you can look that skill up and get better at it. So we did see variability. I don't know if others saw that same thing.
Yeah, I've absolutely seen the same thing. You definitely, in some of these business analysis sessions I've been doing across many organizations, the younger generations and having these conversations with, the departmental staff, they've grown up with, the ability to have information readily at their fingertips. They've grown up with smartphones in their hands and with Google and the immediate access to information. And I think that bleeds into the workforce environment. And so I think, when you look at some of the data in your slides around, Gen Z, and they're finding the most value out of it, but they're putting in the most tickets, maybe it's because they're pushing on the tool harder. They're feeling more confident and experimenting with it and trying it because they're more accustomed to this in their day-to-day work. And so some of those tickets maybe because they're asking for it to do something that we hadn't thought about yet.
That's a very good point. And when we actually think about what comes after Gen Z, Jonathan, you go.
Yeah, no, I think that the younger generations have grown up with, to some degree, this technology and are using personal lives. They probably used it in their school, higher education. So as they're coming into the workforce, they're already used to, and that they require in order to leverage these tools needs to be more expansive than others that might be leveraging the tools, and thus you need more tickets to kind of either get the called or access to it, and then the access that tool have has to be expanded. So I think that tickets.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting is when we think about the generation that comes after Gen Z. So we know that Gen Z entered the workforce around 2021, 22. They had a horrible onboarding because it was COVID and working remotely and all that. But now they're finding their stride. We're seeing it in the data. They're doing great things in the workplace with AI in particular. The generation that comes in next is called Alpha or Gen A. I think of them as Gen A for AI because they'll be the first generation that didn't know how to work before AI. In the same way Gen Z didn't know how to work without the internet or mobile technology. Gen A will, for me, signify Gen AI. They grew up with it. It's their go-to. Any question, anything they want to know or do, first impulsive instinct is, talk to an agent. Or some kind of large language model. So
yeah.
It's going to be fascinating in the years ahead, as the boomers leave the workforce and even my generation, Gen X, leaves the workforce, what it will look like in the future with Gen A and Gen Z running the show, calling all the shots, making all the decisions. That's going to be super interesting, right?
It's going to be really interesting. And I think it's important to keep in mind that I think AI fluency and the ability to immediately access information doesn't lead to wisdom, right? And so we have to marry together the information gathering with then the lived experience and ensuring we still have that mentoring that's in there, right? Like a new nurse can quickly find a policy on an IV insertion, but that doesn't mean that they've ever inserted an IV,
Yeah.
right? And so you need to have the wisdom and the lived experience and know how to marry those two together.
That's such a great insight. So AI will give people knowledge, but you still need
Yeah.
experience to have wisdom. And when you look at the data, you could quickly jump to the conclusion, well, just, turn some of these Gen Zs into the trainers, get them to do the training because they're obviously very tech savvy.
Yeah.
But to your point, they don't have the wisdom or the perspective on all the things that need to be considered, or maybe the ability to form a judgment on the AI answer. Is it right? Does it make sense? How's this playing out in Rochester, Jonathan, in terms of?
Well, I can speak from personal experience that I leverage AI quite often for kind of a gut check, if you will.
Yeah.
But that is based on, I then have 20 years of experience to look at the AI answer and kind of pressure test whether it makes sense or not. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But I think, if I were to just take whatever answer came blindly from AI, I think there would be some potential execution risk present in that. So I think to Kristen's point, there is that knowledge versus wisdom are two different things, and making sure that you're not kind of led down the wrong path by AI is going to be perhaps a challenge for generations that are still gaining experience, which they'll obviously learn from and gain wisdom.
That's a really good point, and I want to frame a question for you, Gene, and it's around the whole discussion that's going around AI slop. I think everyone's becoming a lot more discerning now than they were a year ago or even 2 years ago around really reviewing the quality of what we get from AI tools. And we saw some organizations on LinkedIn and I think Snap and the Meta products all taking actions to suppress content that's purely AI generated and promote content that's clearly human generated. How are you guys at Microsoft looking at this phenomenon of AI slop, and how are you guys viewing this?
Yeah, what we see with clients is you've got kind of two areas where there's a lot of activity. The first is kind of personal productivity. A good example would be ambient listening for clinicians. There's lots of other examples. But it's relatively self-contained, right? If I have a report that's difficult for me to get out of a system of record, whether it be Epic or SAP or whoever, I can now get agents to help do a bunch of that work. And that frees me up. And I don't have a lot of impact to Jonathan or Kristen or anybody else. I'm kind of within my world. But then what you start to see, and I think this gets back to your cohort analysis that you were just showing, is if I start to use an agent in a workflow that has 12 touches across the organization, even if it's a business workflow, I'm only as good as my least knowledgeable touch across those 12 stops. So what you need, on the bar charts that you were showing earlier, is a level of consistency in the workflows that are being designed. Personal productivity, we can all kind of get there in our own personal journeys, right? But when you start to implement workflow changes, you need everybody along and pulling. And so, we're starting to see that level of understanding. And that's what's driven, again, the bar charts. There were, some organizations we work with that came up with a lot of the same cohort conclusions, which is why they found they had to double back down, because you can't get meaningful workflow changes. And, while personal productivity is great, I think the fact that a lot of the costs now are variable in a world that used to be a fixed license, the token economics, you've really got to rationalize where you're spending those tokens and why, and what is coming for the organization out of it. So, this concept of cohort, of aligning with partners, that basically are going to help pull everyone, we're seeing pop up in all our clients.
Yeah. Jonathan, are you guys, have you started on the agent journey yet in your organization?
We have.
You have?
Yes.
How, from a security perspective, how's that going in terms of setting up the right identities and inheriting the right security policies and all the various attributes to allow an agent to do the right tasks and the right tasks only, but just-in-time access to the resources it needs? How's that playing out?
Sure. So I think that the challenge is, number one, have you identified all of the agents within the environment, and do you have just basic controls around AI within the environment? That's kind of the starting point. And then from there, you can then begin to build into the maturity of what those agents are actually doing, and the access that those agents actually have. And I think, depending on where folks, the level of control that they started with, your organizations are in different places within that journey. But my recommendation is make sure that you've identified and have control around what is actually getting individuals have access to, and what is particularly installed from a EXE perspective, executable perspective in the environment, and have that solid inventory, and then kind of secondarily begin to then control. And there are a lot of products out there that are available today to help organizations. Once you've kind of narrowed down your inventory, if you will, of AI within the environment, to help you better control that. And even within the Microsoft suite, for example, tools like Purview, and they're continuing to build out Agent 365 will be helpful in doing that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be huge. And what we've seen, I guess, over the last 50 plus years is Microsoft does a fantastic job with the control plane.
Yes.
You know, it's Contra for controlling identity. It's Intune for endpoints. It's Defender for security. Now it's Purview for the data, being able to apply the right labels and policies and data lifecycle management. And then in the future, I think the next battleground will be agents. And I expect Agent 365 will be the tool we'll use to assign an identity, assign policies, provide access to APIs, manage the life cycle of agents, and make sure they don't become orphaned if the originator leaves the organization, and making sure that they're independent software products with proper governance.
That's right.
So I think that's going to be a really key building block in this going forward.
But for that agentic AI as opposed to web-based,
yes,
prompt chat, getting the identities of those specific agents clear, and the access that those agents will be paramount.
Yeah. Gene, when you look across all the organizations you've got visibility of, can you, without mentioning names, can you maybe talk to any of the really great deployments you've seen so far of agents where agent development, agent use has really taken off and built the organization's confidence to keep going on that?
Yeah, I'd say the organizations that were the fastest movers that we're seeing in health have really adopted this strategy that they basically are going to have teams that are both humans, and then they're going to have agents, and they want to create the identity, the permissioning, the security, the offboarding, onboarding of that, the way they do with an employee. And we're seeing that in development with organizations. The other thing we're seeing is, I think, as you talked about, data classification and Purview, we're seeing organizations, if you decide to try to do everything at once, you'll probably never move, right? And especially if you consider structured, unstructured data, right? It's going to be an endless effort. But I think this gets back to a bit of the governance question of, if you start with what you're trying to achieve, what workflows you're going to impact, how you're going to do things, you then identify the data sets that you need to really get in order. And then you're kind of iteratively moving forward. And we're seeing organizations are moving faster than kind of when they're trying to freeze and get everything, completely done before they start. It's a really tough place to go.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point about the iterative cycle. And I think what we'll see is, as organizations monitor every month what's happening, what prompts are people writing, what data is coming back for those prompts, and where are we seeing any PHI or PII showing up? Where do we need to tighten up on sensitivity labels, or data policies, or security policies, and making that an ongoing cycle, because we cannot possibly get it right the first time. And
yeah, we're even seeing clients that are basically watching that activity and the level of activity, making sure that the investment in licenses and tokens is rational. And if someone kind of jumps into training and then is inactive for a period of time, we see clients kind of taking and repurposing that license elsewhere, which is really effective in an organization that has to really watch dollars, which we all have to do.
We're doing exactly the same, where we identify a use case, deploy AI for that use case and those users with training and maybe an agent or two, and then monitor and see what happens. And if they're not using it, pull the licenses back and give those licenses to a different use case. So each use case becomes an experiment to see, does this work? Can we deliver the hypothesis? Can we make somebody more productive or do the task better, faster, cheaper with AI? And if not, we'll move on to the next one, because there's a long list of ideas for AI mobilization. You know all about this, Kristen, right? Picking the right ones.
And I think it's really important when you're looking at, if an agent isn't being used, going back first and looking at, did we look at the workflows appropriately? Did it fit with what we thought it was going to do? Do we need to optimize it? Did they know about it? Did the staff that could actually use the agent, were they aware that it's out there and how it could impact their workflow, right? And so there's a lot in this that's not just the agent deployment, and not just the here's your license for access, but it's the transformation and understanding what it does to their workflow and communicating about that. And so I have a big soapbox on change management that goes along with this, and just the awareness of what it can do for you and making it personal. Here's what it can do for your role. But put in the training to it, right? So you have the basics and the foundations to AI, but as you've seen in some of your data, you have to teach specifically or train specifically to how that agent, how they can use that agent in their day-to-day workflow, right? For that
Yeah.
specific role. And so
Yeah.
a lot of conversation around that.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting if I tie together the three things you guys have just talked about: the need for ongoing monitoring and fine tuning of all the data security policies. That will be an ongoing journey. The ongoing management and monitoring of all the agents, because I'm pretty sure we will get to a point where agents will be building agents. Do you think that's going to happen soon, Gene?
All right. I mean, if you look at a couple of the biggest cases that just played out, that's exactly what's happening, right? And those agents, building agents, when given a task, are proving to be incredibly creative and surprisingly agile as they go to try to solve the problem that you've given them. So, like, it's this question of what you be very specific about what you ask, and then have observability as to what and how they're going about doing it. No doubt, there's gonna be a bunch of learnings there.
Yeah. So managing all those agents, the identity, the life cycle, and of course they'll all need to be updated and patched because the systems they talk to will change, the APIs will change, the schemas will change, and then the spend management, which is going to be fascinating because 6 months ago we all thought we just buy a license, that's it, nice and easy, we can walk away from that. Now we know, oh no, it's not that simple. We've got to buy credits, which give us tokens, which enable us to do tasks. And now, of course, we see we have to buy these ACUs, which give us access to all the Azure resources. So all of a sudden, there is a whole token economy opening up, and it's going to become very complex very quickly. And I think getting that under control and being able to then plan for that and budget for it, and also make rational decisions around, is this workflow worth the money? And that's something we're doing internally, building reports and producing things with co-work and looking at the cost. You can go /cost and saying, well, that cost $3.74. Was it worth it? Would it have cost us significantly more for a human to do this? In most cases, the answer is absolutely, but just being judicious about it, because the cost of the tokens, we're trying to budget this ourselves internally, and we think the cost of tokens are going to go up as we lean into this. It's going to go up, and being able to understand what value we're getting. So if I stitch those three things together: ongoing management of the data, ongoing management of the agents, ongoing management of the spend, I think those are going to become the critical foundations for long-term success in healthcare organizations that want to do AI well.
Well, and to that point, I think having an organization or part of the IT organization that is focused on the management of AI is critically important. If you're trying to do that kind of as a side job, I think that you're really going to struggle. Yeah.
It's not a part-time hobby in between rolling out, other technologies or patching solutions. It's going to require dedicated effort. Yeah.
Dedicated team.
Yes. And in terms of, organizations getting started, getting underway, I wanted to share something here. Can you see the screen again? There we go. This is where we tapered off. But I wanted to share with you all the mistakes we made at Mobile Mentor when we started with AI, because I think we made every mistake in the book. And I like to share them because they're quite educational. We didn't know who we should deploy AI to. We had not defined our use cases. We didn't know how much data was overexposed. When we did our first scan, actually, we had 33,000 sensitive data assets at risk. 33,000. We hadn't trained ourselves on how to use AI and Copilot specifically in applications like Excel and Word and PowerPoint. We were pretty decent in the browser, but we were not good in the applications. At first, we didn't know where to start with agents. We had no plumbing, we had no foundation, we didn't know how to go about it. And then when the board asked me, how much of a return are we getting on our AI investment? At that stage, we were about 2/3 of the organization deployed. I had no answer. I had no data, I had no answer. I couldn't have told them we should turn it all off or we should give it to everybody. I had no way of judging or measuring. So those 5 problems as we talk to other organizations, we found that most organizations were nodding and smiling and saying, "Oh yeah, you're not the only one to have those problems. We've got similar." So we've now identified these as the 5 foundations, and we've wrapped them together into a program which Kristen is part of, called our Co-Pilot Mentoring Program, where we systematically work through these over usually a 12-month or 24-month period, depending on the size of the organization, and systematically interview people, document the use cases through good old-fashioned business analysis, and then stack rank them, force the organization to stack rank them and pick the top 5 or the top 10, which means we're going to ignore all the others. So just pick the top ones we go after. And then doing the scanning, discovery, and applying policies and labeling so that we know when people find data that hopefully the right data is showing up in the prompts. And we're not finding W2s or PIPs or anything sensitive, that's all been excluded. Then doing the training, and that's super interesting how we do that, and generic training, but role specific as well. Then building out the agents, and not just the agents now, but the skills as well, reusable skills across an organization. And then finally turning all that into an ROI model. So we've got a way of looking back at the use case and saying, we had a hypothesis that we could improve a day in the life of this specific role. What's the data now telling us? When we pull data out of Viva Insights and map that to an economic model and say, are we truly saving time? Are we getting a return? What is our ROI? And we've been running this internally now for about, I think, 7 or 8 months, and it's showing us 600% ROI on our spend on AI, which is really interesting. We're an information organization, knowledge workers, so you would expect it to be high. But Kristen, I want to put to you is, you're very familiar with the front line of healthcare, and the frontline workers who are all walking around with an iPad or a smartphone that has a camera and an accelerometer and all these sensors and all this data. Why are frontline workers not being equipped with any AI? Why is all the AI investment going to the knowledge workers, the back office folks?
Well, I think there's a lot packed into that, right? So you saw from the data that healthcare is lagging in AI adoption, and so they're starting to have some of those deep, thoughtful conversations of in an environment where the workflows are not consistent. We're dealing with human lives. We need to have accurate data. How do we do that in a manner in which our data is protected? We're protecting our patients' information. We're finding the right data to apply at the right time, and then having the wisdom and judgment to take that information and apply it. And so it's a complicated, highly standardized environment that we are trying to, I shouldn't say highly standardized, highly governed, right? Because our workflows aren't standardized for the most part, but it's highly governed, right? And so to change a policy, to change a practice, it takes time and thoughtful conversations, and it crosses multiple disciplines. It's not just a nurse, it's not just a provider, it's not just IT, it's not just finance. All of our systems start to weave together. And so making sure we're having those cross-functional conversations is really, really important. And so I think that it's not that there's not value there, but we're looking at it from like a crawl, walk, run perspective, right? And so finding the use cases that can apply in that environment that have the most value, but the least risk and complexity, and starting there first, right? And so I think that that's why we're not seeing it booming at the front lines yet. We're working behind the scenes with HR and finance and some of those areas first.
Yeah. Jonathan, if I ask you for a moment to put on.
Let me comment on that, if you don't mind, build on that. I think some of it is that the AI that's being used in the clinical spaces or with the frontline workers is actually going to be coming from clinical companies, electronic medical record companies, or ambient listening type technology companies. And so those things are happening, and folks may not even be aware that in some cases that they're leveraging AI that's happening in the background, potentially in like an EMR solution. And that so I think that those inroads are being made. But when it comes to more what I would say general business use AI, I agree that largely has been targeted towards knowledge workers within the healthcare industry, because that's, I think, where there's a belief that the greatest value will be delivered, at least at this point in time. Not to say that that won't change in the future.
Yeah.
But
Jonathan, while you got the mic and unmuted, if you were in the role of a mentor, talking to other healthcare organizations as a senior leader in an organization that is very mature, and we know how mature you guys are, what advice or what words of wisdom would you share around those who are early, for those who are early in their AI journey?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, having a team focused on AI is really important, and having what you put up before in terms of those kind of 5 areas are really good areas to focus on from an AI governance perspective. So having AI governance, and then having security has to be a partner in the AI governance from the beginning. And you've really got to be building your security controls in AI as the AI is being introduced into the environment. And then having someone specifically, at least for our organization, dedicated to AI security has become increasingly important, because as this starts to blossom and grow, the day-to-day challenges or that come forward, and as I mentioned before, that inventorying, understanding that, getting your inventory, what's allowed access, and then starting to build the controls around that access, all of that is going to take time and effort and expertise. And if you don't have someone who's really focused on that, I think it becomes, as mentioned before, a side hobby, and you're not going to be as successful.
Yeah. Gene, thank you for that, Jonathan. That's really, really insightful. Gene, I'd like to ask you to comment on something for me. When I think about AI, the amount of investment and big money that's moving around, and all the investments across companies, it's mind-blowing. We've never seen anything like this. But one thing I've seen as a Microsoft partner is the money that's flowing out of Microsoft to partners to enable customers. I've never seen anything like that either. Microsoft is being incredibly generous with the different funding buckets to help with pre-sales, post-sales, helping organizations figure out what are their use cases, how to secure the data, how to train the people, how to build the agents, how to measure it. Why is Microsoft making such a huge investment in this space? We've never seen this with any other technology.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think collectively we would all agree that as these systems and agents are implemented, we're fundamentally changing the way work is going to exist, the way the internet, and, if you go back to mainframes to mid-ranges in the 80s, it's a fundamental shift of how everything is going to work. I mean, and to hit that point specifically, I think what we consistently see is across that paradigm that you just talked about in terms of how you think about the implementation of change, that the change management element of this is always kind of underappreciated, right? So, the way everything, a nurse's schedule has been, kind of worked for 15 years in this shared spreadsheet that everybody kind of is culturally and super comfortable with, and they've kind of iterated so it's perfectly suited to exactly what they wanted. And that took 15 years and people's heart and soul and effort. And, the change to go to even something that will ultimately save, you get back to the basic change management, like, why are we doing this? And have we educated, have we skilled people in this new tool? They're really used to Excel. Are they now comfortable with this different, so there's a bunch of change management elements that I think, as we've seen organizations then debrief with organizations as they've implemented, there was a need for more investment, and that's part of, on top of the infrastructure and security and lots of other more publicized elements. The double down, I would say, is on that investment in change management and people.
That's awesome. Guys, I'm going to share one last thought. I'm going to take us back to this screen with the 5 workflows we have in the Copilot mentoring program. And for those organizations who are listening to this or any part of this, we've now got a Copilot readiness assessment, we call it, where it's a good way to start. And this normally comes with a price tag. It's on our website. We're offering this free here today for anyone who's participating in this webinar with myself, Kristen, Jonathan, and Jean. So we'll put a link in the chat afterwards, and we're going to do this free. And so what we do is we ask a whole bunch of questions around use case definition, the data security, the training, written change management, readiness, the readiness to deploy agents, and the ability to measure and monitor ROI. And so we'll show it, try to score, show how the organization compares to other organizations, and then most importantly, build a plan. And so we're willing to do that for free for organizations to share what we've learned so far. And we learn from every engagement. So this is a fun journey. One of the most fun things we've ever done, actually. So on that, let me thank our audience, Kristen, Jonathan, Jean. You guys have been wonderful, and you bring very different perspectives as a clinician, as a chief information security officer, and as an enabler of success at Microsoft. So thank you guys for sharing your insights and your wisdom here today, and really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Appreciate
Dennis.
the time.